Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life. A series of programs highlighting the social and cultural interaction between the worshiping and larger communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Area Conference of Churches in cooperation with KTBC. Join us now in today's Austin Faith Dialogue.
The reason mountain climbers are tied together is to keep the sane ones from going home. I don't know who said it, or when or where, but I've chuckled over it, thought about it, and quoted it too. With a mountain of mercy behind me and a mountain of mission ahead, I need you, my sister, my brother. I need to be tied to you. And you need me too. We need each other to keep from bolting, fleeing in panic, and returning to the sanity of unbelief. A man I know wrote those words, and I share them with you today as I welcome you to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, pastor of Gethsemane Lutheran. Today we will focus on AIDS, the #1 public health concern facing you, me, and our brothers and sisters nationwide and here in Austin, Texas. Joining me today is Sandy Bartlett, staff member of AIDS Services of Austin, and Tana Christie, a board member and volunteer of the AIDS Services of Austin, and Richard Bates. Richard's on special appointment for the United Methodist Tradition. I want to welcome the three of you here and thank you for sharing this time with me as we share with the Austin community this time of dialogue and discussion regarding AIDS. Sandy, thanks.
Thank you, Carl.
Today when we visited in your office, you talked to me about the history of AIDS Services of Austin, and I wish that you would tell the community listening in today about AIDS Services of Austin, the history, and how it was developed.
The original operation, which made a response to the growing AIDS problem in Austin, began in the autumn of 1984 and was called the Austin AIDS Project. It was an outgrowth of the ministry found at Waterloo Counseling Center here in Austin. Eventually, the AIDS operation became such a large part of that function that it became necessary to separate the two organizations. So in January of 1987, they were formally separated, and the organization now known as AIDS Services of Austin came into being.
So you've been in existence then as a separate entity since January of 1987.
That's right.
Tell me a little bit about the AIDS virus. When was it identified as a reality within our society, within the North American culture?
Well, we began seeing the manifestations of the virus in 1979 and early 1980. The medical community realized that there was something very wrong out there when two rather rare diseases began appearing with frequency in population groups where they should not have been. That eventually became identified as the situation we know as AIDS. Then the virus itself was identified very early in 1985.
And the response of the Austin community then, or people within the Austin community through the you say Waterloo Counseling Service, was to be aware of we needed to respond and do something for this situation?
Yes, we saw an increasing caseload, and there was not really an adequate response being made in any segment of the community. So Waterloo felt that a response was in order, and that's when volunteers, with the guidance of the staff at Waterloo, began what became known as the Austin AIDS Project.
So volunteers have been important since the very beginning.
Oh, yes. We live and breathe by our volunteers and always have.
Like most congregations and synagogues do around our
Yes,
community.
yes, it's true.
Tana, you're here and you represent volunteers. And what are some of the activities of the volunteers at the AIDS Services of Austin?
Well, there's a whole range of places where people can volunteer. You can volunteer to be on the phone line, which is manned, and you answer questions as people call in. You can become part of the buddy program, which is sort of a long-term commitment to one person and be available. The helper program is the same kind of thing. You go and you either prepare meals for someone, give them a ride for a client, take them someplace and just be available. The helper program is not as permanent a situation. That we have lots of other things. We have food drives, we have fundraising projects. We just
And you'd probably like to let people know who are out there that they can be responding to that, either through the food drives or through the fundraising project. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on as we go through the program. But I'm also wondering, how many people do you have as volunteers now with AIDS Services of Austin? And what kind of training? You mentioned to be on the phone bank, is that what you called it?
Yes.
And wouldn't, Sandy, they'd have to have some sort of training, I would think, to be able to do that.
Yes, we ask all of our volunteers to attend a 2-hour orientation. Partly it covers the disease AIDS, and then part of it is about our agency, so they'll know better where it is that they want to devote their efforts. We hold those the second Saturday morning of each month at the Travis County Health Department from 10 until 12. So our next one will then be the second Saturday of October. And we ask them then on the basis of that to let us know where they want to volunteer. Now, Tana mentioned the buddy program and the phone line work. Both of those require extensive further training. Each of them requires, for instance, a 2-day seminar and then further development beyond that.
So the first step, if a person wants to volunteer to work with AIDS Services of Austin, and this is also Central Texas, and let's pursue that a little bit just momentarily, but would be to have that 2-hour orientation session that you talk about.
Right.
And then if you're going to get involved in like the buddy program, or if you're going to get involved in the telephone bank, that you will have to have more than that, and you have to have a couple days of orientation and work. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What about other things that people do? What kind of numbers do you have in the area of volunteers?
we have about 400 volunteers.
And those people are broken up into different groups and interest
Yes.
levels and that type of thing.
And some people spill over into more than one interest level.
Tana, did you start with this organization before January of 1987, or how did
Just
you
about
find
at the same time.
About the
Excuse me.
same time. And you heard about it through, how, radio programs? Did you hear Sandy on the radio or something, or television, or how did you find out?
I looked it up in the telephone book and tried to find. I was interested in AIDS. I had read about it out of a magazine in New York and got very concerned about it because nobody here seemed to know anything about it, or no one that I knew even talked about it. And so I just started picking around the phone book and then finally
You're
called.
an interesting and amazing person to
Thank
be able to
you.
kind of pursue it that way, because I think it's kind of a hush-hush topic, and
Yes.
a lot of people don't want to talk, and we want to bring it out in the open and say this is a part of our community, this is a part of life, and let's look at it and see how we can be helpful and supportive to one another in that process. What has been your experience as a volunteer? Has it been exciting?
It really has. At first it was devastating. The first 2 days that I volunteered, I went home and went to bed at 5:30 in the afternoon, and I kept saying, I can't do this.
What did your family say about that? Did they allow you to go home and go to bed at 5?
Well, they were not sure what was wrong.
Yeah, right.
They did. My daughter, both my children are college age, my daughter, they've all been very supportive. My daughter has done volunteer work in California as a result
Great.
of that. She's gotten very interested in it. And my husband has been very supportive, and I've gotten the usual questions, why are you doing that, and are you sure you should be doing that? But to me, it's the most important thing in my life right now, and I don't know what I would do without it, and I hope we're making a difference.
You've grown, you've learned, you've become more understanding and compassionate through that experience.
Absolutely.
That's really neat, Tana.
Thank you.
Sandy, tell us more about what services are available, and I really want to underscore that this is not simply for the Austin community. This is Central Texas, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes, we are funded by the City of Austin, Travis County, and the state of Texas for a variety of different functions. So obviously we cover first and foremost Austin and Travis County, which in terms of its health care delivery system is a single entity. We then spill over into the surrounding counties of Central Texas in certain functions. We are charged by the state to do that as part of our grant process.
And that money comes from the state and from these other sources, and they ask you then to do what type of services to offer to the area you're to serve?
We provide two types of service. One is the direct service to the person who has some stage of HIV infection. We deal not only with people who have what is called full-blown AIDS, which is defined by the federal government, but also people who have ARC, or AIDS-related complex, which is a perhaps less severe but nonetheless debilitating stage of infection with the HIV virus. We have case managers who help to assess the individual and get them plugged into the resources they need. Of course, we have the variety of volunteer programs that Tana talked about, the helpers and buddies and advocates and the like. Then in terms of direct material support, we have an emergency financial assistance fund called the Paul Kirby Fund, which will pay temporarily rent, utilities, and so forth to keep people from being evicted from their homes or having their electricity shut off. We also have a food and clothing bank, as Tana mentioned. The second arm of our operation is educational in nature, and that's what I specifically deal with. We have a speakers bureau. We can go out and address any level of audience from school kids all the way through to physicians. We have a whole stable full of qualified, trained speakers to address the information needs of any segment of society. We have the information phone line, which Tana mentioned, which incidentally, that number is 472-AIDS. It is staffed from 10 in the morning until 10 at night, Monday through Friday. There is always someone there on call to answer the public's questions because the public has an awful lot of questions. Then we also have more targeted workshops to deal with specific educational concerns. We have a variety of publications, brochures, newsletters, pamphlets, and the like.
I hear you saying then that there are two levels of your outreach. You have that to be supportive to the person who is dealing with this illness.
Right.
But you're also reaching out to the community and speaking to the community and seeking to educate the community and to let them know what is happening in the area of this illness.
Yes. Remember that we have no vaccine and we have no cure for this disease. So the only means we have of stopping the disease is to educate people, and by education elicit from them then responsible behavior and put a stop to the transmission of the disease, even if we can't cure those who are already infected at this time.
Sandy, I know your area is really education, and that's where you go out and speak to people, and I understand you have a full load, and that's why I'm really happy that you come and be with us today on this program.
Thanks for the opportunity.
But if I should call and say, I think that I may have this illness, I'm not sure, what is the process? What happens to a person who calls the number that you mentioned? Are there steps that they go through? Do you encourage them to follow some steps? This isn't so much in your area as maybe somebody else's area, but what would be the process that a person who might call AIDS Services of Austin?
Well, actually, they probably would call that phone line and speak with one of us on the phone line staff first. We would help them to assess what their situation is, and if it sounds like they really do have a serious concern, and please understand that an awful lot of people out there are simply terrified. They're what we call the worried well.
Right. And
they really don't have any truly legitimate concern. They have no risk factors. They haven't really been exposed. They're just afraid. But if they do have what sounds like a potentially serious situation with the HIV virus, then we urge them to consider being tested. If they are already symptomatic, we urge them to come on in and plug into our system, to become one of our clients, to get medical treatment in some fashion.
If they come in and be one of your clients,
Yes.
Does that cost them something?
No.
What does it mean to become a client of AIDS Services of Austin?
They would come in, they would have an interview in depth with one of our social worker case managers that I mentioned before, who will assess their situation, see where they are in terms of stages of the illness, and get them plugged into the appropriate resources, whether they be medical resources, support services, or the like.
Richard,
No, there is no cost.
There is no cost.
No,
so if
no.
someone would want to call that number, there is not cost, but there will be a sensitive, willing person on that end to listen, to be supportive, and I think that you're the afraid, how did you term that? The well?
Worried well.
Worried well.
Yes, yes.
That's, I think that's a very important service that you offer to people, and to say to them, we are here to serve the entire community
That's right.
as we deal with this illness that is in our society.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. Richard, you were saying before we went on the air that you've been a part of this for a while, and that you've known Sandy, and you've all been what's been your observation of what's been going on in reaching out to the person who has the AIDS virus?
What I've told many groups before whom I've spoken is what I have observed, especially from a spiritual or ministerial vantage point, is the love that I've seen come forth and shared. I've seen families who were not necessarily close, brothers who rarely spoke, friends that you didn't know necessarily were your friends, come together and become close, and a real close-knit, loving, caring family who weren't before. And to me, that's one of the beauties that has come out of this crisis. And out of every crisis, there is something like this that comes forth, and it's the love that I've seen spring forth.
You know, that's what we hope will come from this discussion, is that those who watch this program will recognize that out of this experience, like other experiences, that illness of any shape or form that comes into our lives, that there is something where we can grow, and in religious terminology, be redemptive in our lives, that can offer us the opportunity to experience community and experience the health and relationship with other people. But Sandy mentioned something about the fears that grip people. And what about those fears, Richard, that are a reality out there in people's lives? Is it simply the fear of the unknown? Is it another type of fear? What have you experienced as you've talked to people? And Sandy, I'd like to come back to you as you've gone out with education and talked to people out in the community. What's some of the responses you've had and experienced from people in the community? But Richard, what about you?
Some of it's lack of proper or accurate information. Some of it's bigotry, lack of charity, to put it in
Yes.
spiritual context. And what I share with some people is, especially in a Christian context, is to go back and look at Jesus' ministry. Who did he minister to? And there were several different types of lifestyles and personages who were not cared for or liked at that time by that community. The prostitute, the tax collector were abhorred by the rest of society, and yet he came and ate with them and spoke with them and became close to them, ministered to them. And that's what I see as our ministry today, to follow that example and take a look inwardly as to who our neighbor is and how we can help our neighbor. And this is a very prime example of how we can help our neighbor. And this is a disease that is going on and affecting our brothers and sisters, mothers, fathers, parents, friends and neighbors.
But Richard, one of the concerns and interests that I have in this, and I'm really a novice, and I've learned a lot from Sandy today, just visiting with him prior to coming to the show, is that it's not what we can always do for others. You know, it's what we receive in that whole process. Ton, I think that's what you were talking about, what you have received in this whole process. And it's true with whomever we share life in this process of living. And in life, there is, for all of us, the experience of illness, and that to become whole people. Sandy, what about you when you go out there and visit with folks in the community? And what are some of the fears and concerns that they have? And then what are some of the joys that have been brought forward as you've seen people respond in ways of saying, aha, you know, now I see?
As Richard pointed out, a great deal of the fear is simple lack of proper information. We find that increasingly people are willing to have that information. This was not necessarily true a couple of years ago, but people are increasingly realizing that this is a public health issue. It is a disease like any other disease and must be treated as such. If I could make one attitudinal change on the part of the entire population, it would be to come to that realization that this is a disease. The virus does not care what your gender is. It does not care what your sexual preference is. It does not care about your race, your religion, or any other factor. If you give it the opportunity, it will strike you. And it just doesn't care. So as we get people to change their thinking and realize that these are human beings, these are people that we know. And indeed, I would predict to you that before more than a couple of years, I target 1993, we're all going to know someone openly. Indeed, I suspect that most of us have already known someone who had HIV infection and simply did not know it because the individual was afraid to come forth and let us know. When someone says, I have cancer or I have a heart condition, immediately everyone rushes around them and provides support.
Right.
People with AIDS are not necessarily getting this kind of support.
Do you think that'll change? Do you think that through programs like this one and through your work and through what Richard's doing and Tana, from all of us working together, that attitude can be changed, where we recognize, once again, that people are what's important and that we are here to care for one another, support one another, and help one another? Do you believe that's a possibility?
I've seen it dramatically in the last few years, and I expect it to go on just as dramatically. We still have a ways to go, but it is getting better.
You mentioned about information. The Surgeon General had sent out to the citizens of our nation information. Where do we get the adequate information? Where are some of the sources where people can receive information that allow them to make intelligent, well-founded decisions?
Well, obviously, AIDS Services of Austin.
Thank you.
to plug our own organization, because that's what we're there for. We're not there to sell books. We're not there to push any particular bias, either in terms of medicine or philosophy or sociology or politics or anything else. We're simply there to provide care for those who are affected and to provide education for the general public. So if someone has an educational concern, we'll be glad to supply a variety of information resources. Obviously, for the individual who wants to pursue it themselves, the public library is great. Certain physicians are good, but not all physicians have necessarily felt that they would have to deal with this. So they haven't particularly taken the effort to make themselves knowledgeable. After all, there's a wealth of information they have to absorb all the time, and if they don't think that's a very high priority in their particular practice, they may have neglected it. So one's personal physician may or may not be an accurate resource, but certainly they could steer one to perhaps accurate resources.
So if a person wanted information, they could contact you, your office,
Yes.
and you would be able to point them to information they could read. Well, what about support groups? Is that a possibility? Are there informational groups that people could gather together and visit with?
Yes, we have a variety of support groups as part of our educational outreach, and indeed Richard is operative in a couple of those. Some of them are targeted solely toward those who have HIV infection. They are very closed, they are very private, because there is still a confidentiality issue that surrounds this disease. As long as there is a stigma attached, and as long as people can be discriminated because of the disease, then we need that confidentiality. On the other hand, we have groups ranging all the way through to those who have loved ones, family, friends, or maybe are just concerned about the disease themselves. They can go, they can find supportive, positive people to talk to and be counseled in that fashion.
Richard, you're a part of some of these support groups. What are some of the things that happen in those support groups? What goes on there? And is this closed, confidential group that Sandy was talking about?
The one I facilitate is open to people who've tested positive for the HIV infection or are worried well, or are partners, friends, family members of someone in the group, or someone across the country who's in a similar situation. And they can come, and it's a safe space to talk about whatever issue. It can be food, it can be exercise, it can be who to tell. Support groups, one's support systems is very important. Holding that information alone is very difficult, and so that's one of the issues we talk about. What usually happens is that people come, they've just been diagnosed as being positive, and they come within a week to a few weeks, and they're frantic. They're just they've shut down, and they go to work, they come home, they go to the grocery store, they fill up their car, and that's it. They stop pretty much all social life. And once they come to the group, they talk about this. And gradually, as they continue to attend each week, they start, after a month or 2 months or 3 months, they think, well, I'm still healthy, I'm still about the same, I guess life's going to go on. But in the meantime, they've stopped buying some new sheets or painting their apartment or buying new dishes, or that pet that I was going to get, I probably shouldn't get because I may not be alive next month. And they come to realize, no, I'm still alive, I'm still feeling pretty good, and so I'm going to go on living. And they do.
It's a pretty good conclusion to come to for all of us. Let's go on living life. There is an event coming up at First United Methodist in November that you're a part of. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and when it'll be held? Yeah,
it's going to be Saturday, November 12th, I believe starting about 9 or 9:30 in the morning and going till approximately 3:30 or 4 that afternoon. And we'll have various speakers giving their experience in dealing with persons with AIDS and the families. It's not just the persons with AIDS or HIV we're dealing with, but families, and that can be a next-door neighbor. It can be grandparents from Michigan. It can be any number of people. As I mentioned to someone who talked to me recently about a funeral, I said, it's not so much the person that we're dealing with, but the relatives and the family members who are grieving.
I think that's right.
So it covers a large number of people.
The extended family. Tana, can you say something to us about what's going to happen? We're just about out of time. Anything that's happening that you can say to the public that you'd like to let them know for AIDS Services of Austin?
No, we just need people. We want people to understand, and if they just will pick up the phone and call us, we'll try to talk to them.
And you'll encourage them, you'll witness and testify to them that this can be a growing experience, and you can learn and feel a part of the process of living life. Is that right?
Absolutely, and it's something we all need to deal with and understand.
You want their time, you want their talent, almost sounds like stewardship in a local congregation, but most of all, you want their spirit of compassion and support, right? Sandy, anything you can say in closing to the people watching?
Compassion is doubly important here because these individuals who have HIV infection or have loved ones who have the infection need more than ever the compassion and support of someone who is sick. And if we can give that to them, that's one of the biggest gifts that we can offer.
I think that's the gift that you've offered to us, and we thank all of you for being with us. We are indeed bound together in a community experience of life. Thanks for being with us today. And we invite you at Austin Faith Dialogue to join us next week when we'll discuss the presidential election. Thank you. Shalom.